Okay, so we're going to look at another example of solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. So this one will be for non-perfect squares, whereas my other video will be for perfect squares. Okay, so we have our equation here, x squared plus 16x plus 50 equals 0. Our first step was to move the constant to the other side. So in this case, I'm going to subtract 50 from both sides. Okay. I'm going to rewrite x squared plus 16x. I told you guys in the other video I'm going to leave a little bit of a blank here, equals negative 50. There were two methods that I talked about. You can do whichever one you choose. I'm going to use the one where I locate what my b term is. So my b term here is 16. I'm going to take my b term and divide it by 2. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then I'm going to square that number. 8 squared equals 64. Okay, so 64 is getting added to both sides. Remember, we have to keep the equation balanced. So on the left-hand side, I have x squared plus 16x plus 64. And I take negative 50 plus 64 is 14. Okay, just scroll down just a little bit. On the left-hand side, I'm going to factor. I'm going to look what adds to 16 and what multiplies to 64. We talked about it has to be the same factor here because it has to be a perfect square. It has to be raised to the second power. So the only numbers that multiply to 64 and add to 16 are 8 and 8. So I can... Previously, I could have written this as two sets of parentheses, but since it's the same number, I'm going to write x plus 8 squared equals 14. Now, part 1, we ended here, but part 2, now we have to keep going. So our goal is to get x by itself. So I'm going to undo the squared term by square rooting both sides. Okay? Whenever I square root something that's being squared, I'm just left with what's underneath. And I have to make sure when I do this, I take the plus and minus of the square root. Okay, I'm going to leave it as is right now. Again, I'm trying to get x by itself. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. And I remember I said put this number in front of the plus and minus sign. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I'm left with x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 14. Okay, so is 14 a perfect square? No. Do I have any perfect square factors of 14? No. So this is my final answer. Okay, depending on delta math here, we may not have to plug in the x equals. Okay, when you go to plug it in, it'll ask if you're sure, in which case we may not have to. Okay, negative 8, there is a plus or minus button, so you would press that, and there is a square root button, so you would press that, and the 14 is going to go underneath. Okay, nothing simplifies, so there would be my final answer. Okay, so hopefully this helped you guys out, and thanks a lot.